two people in the plot to kidnap Whitmer have been let off because it was determined basically that the FBI entrapped them into that plot, which basically we've all known about for quite some time. But it was interesting to see that there was so much evidence of it that even our corrupt criminal justice system, which always seems to fall in the favor of law enforcement, particularly federal law enforcement, that they even got off there. And then there was the other case where the guy who was involved in January 6th, who I guess entered the Capitol building, he got off because he had video evidence of a cop, Capitol Hill police, letting him in to the building. And I don't know, I just thought both of those were very interesting stories, and kind of speak to, you know, this thing where there's this huge, like, kind of a created story, this huge narrative emerges, and then you find out actually that even in our insanely unfair criminal justice system, the evidence was just so overwhelming that the courts are sitting here saying, yeah, what the media was telling you, that's not at all what happened here, as it turns out. What were your thoughts on either or both of those cases?
Well, you're 100% right that, you know, they're trying to build this domestic terrorism thing, and they were saying that everyone who was involved, including Garland, saying we're going to get everyone no matter what their involvement was. So that's a potentially really big win for anyone who did just walk in. There were people in the front who were violent, and those people, they probably, you know, there should be some penalties for them. Everyone else that was just walking around because they just followed the crowd in, probably not. The only thing that I wouldn't celebrate as a victory yet is that this guy does have a history of being some sort of a government contractor. So it's a possibility that this is just the first FBI guy getting off the hook that actually went to a case. I'm not saying that as an absolute, but it would seem to create precedent of that the individuals who were not violent and ended up in the building can now make the claim that they thought that they were allowed to be there, because there are videos of, like, you know, doors just being open, people just walking in, not everyone just flooded. So that's a huge win. And then the other case, apparently what screwed over the FBI is that they had recordings, and so they were playing the recordings in court, and it was so obvious that these were just dummies standing around going, yeah, what we ought to do this.
They were like borderline homeless drug addicts who the FBI convinced to, like, go. Like, they talked a lot of shit, you know, like a bunch of them be like, yeah, we should kidnap the fucking, you know, blah, 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 the governor, we should do this. But the FBI guys are the ones who came in and really, like, sold them on the plot. By the way, this happens all the time in what the FBI calls sting operations, that are really, when you look at them, entrapment operations, where they go around and they take someone, they convince them, they even in many cases even participate in the radicalizing of these people, then give them everything they need, then give them the plan, then give them the means to enact the plan. And then when they start to do it, go, you're under arrest, we're all FBI. And then they brag about how they thwarted some attack. But what's interesting about the Whitmer one particularly is that this was a big story that was intentionally created. And what was the goal of it? Well, the goal was to paint these lockdown resistors as terrorists. And that's why they had this whole entrapment scheme. The goal was to say, oh, the people who are against this governor who's freaking, you know, declared an emergency and is suspending all of your basic rights. Well, we want a big fat example of that being, well, these are really, you should think of them as like dangerous terrorists who are going to kidnap and kill a governor, which, you know, for all the insanity of the last 2 years, didn't happen anywhere. And besides this one example, which is all, you know, and now determined in court to be basically entrapment by the FBI, you don't have one example of an actual violent act happening to one of these governors. And I'm not saying we should have. I'm making no comment on that subject. But it's just not the reality. That's just not true. So they just try to create this completely false dynamic. And then, of course, everybody in the media, all the Brian Stelter types, eat it up, talk about it 24/7, really create this narrative. And then, of course, the other thing I think that's really infuriating, and this kind of reminds me of the point you make a lot, Rob, which is, I think, a really great insight. One of your points is like, one of the most fucked up things about the way the government works is that they can do something illegal, and then the courts determine that it was illegal, and now they have to stop. That's their punishment. And you're like, but if they were doing it for the last 2 months, it's not like if you or I were doing something illegal for 2 months, we're prosecuted for that, you know? But like, it's like if we just did something illegal, like if you were, if you were just like robbing from your neighbor or something like that, and then 2 months after you've been stealing everything from your neighbor, they go, hey, we just caught you, and now your punishment is you have to stop stealing from your neighbor. That's your punishment. And you're like, well, I don't go to jail. But no, you're not going to jail. You go, do I have to return the stuff? No, you keep what you got. You know what I mean? It's like, you just have to stop. You'd probably be incentivized to like commit a lot of crimes because like there's no punishment here. And that's literally the way it works with government. They can do something and then the courts come in and determine it's illegal and they go, okay, you got to stop doing that. But there's no repercussions beyond that. And in a similar kind of, in a sense, there's something similar about this dynamic where you would think that when these things come out, right? Like this is a story now, and it's being reported. Like if you Google it, you can find what happened in the Whitmer case, but it's not nearly as big of a story as the original story was. You know what I mean? And you'd think in some way that like, first, number one, this should have to be as big a story as the initial story or much bigger. And second, there should be like consequences in some ways for the people who all pushed the original story that turned out to be bullshit. But of course, there's none of that. And that's a big problem with how this whole system works, is that there's no kind of like repercussions for any of this.
In this case, the FBI prosecutor just gets to go, well, we didn't get the verdict we want, but we respect the jury system. Whitmer gets to go up there and go, this is a tragedy because this was proof of the fact that words equal violence, and this is the kind of rhetoric that spews violence, and now these people are just going free. The reality is federal courts should probably there should be footage of it the same as like the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, so we can see how dirty these prosecutors are. And like, yeah, these people's lives were still ruined for the last 2 years. I think they've been sitting in jails, or if not, they've definitely had legal expenses.
Yeah.
Like, how come there isn't an insight into, whoa, what was going on at the FBI here that you guys decided to run a sting operation on 4 individuals? Or are you guys trying to make news stories so you can get a domestic terrorism title? Why is it that you want a domestic terrorism title? What other liberties are you guys going to take advantage of if you get this title so that individuals don't even have to go to courts like this that can't be filmed? And how often is this happening? How many other people are in jails because they weren't white and they were Muslim, and so a jury wasn't as favorable towards them when they were radicalized and maybe were a little bit further along in their plot?
Right. And you seem to have, and another thing that's just another crazy example. And this is, I think, more when Brian Stelter says, when you talk about the regime, you're talking about Joe Biden, but it's actually much more than that. Like when we talk about the regime, we're talking about stuff like this as well. We're talking about the entire like apparatus. And the truth is that this story happened during a presidential election season. And that it was very related to that too. Right. So here you have like the story being that the kind of like Trumpist anti-lockdown type people are really all a bunch of terrorists. And so then it also leads to this question of like, what's going on here? Is the FBI working to create a narrative that would hurt the president of the United States?